Shabbat Shalom. Today, December 25th, I hardly need tell you, is famous throughout the world because of Christmas. Some years ago, I'm pretty sure, we discussed during Shabbat services on the weekend close to Christmas, we discussed the impact that Christmas has sometimes had on Jewish communities in different places and different times, and how Jews have related to this highlight on the Christian calendar. Well, this year, I thought I'd take just a few minutes to speak about a significant event on the Jewish calendar, which in 2020 aligns with the 25th of December. And without wanting to be presumptuous, I'm assuming that many of you or some of you might not be all that familiar with it. I have to admit that as I researched it, I learned some details which were completely new to me. So what I'm thinking about is known as Asara B'Tevet, the 10th day of the month of Tevet, a fast day which, as Roosevelt said, lives forever in infamy in Jewish life. According to 2 Kings 25, verses 1 through 4. And in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, moved against Jerusalem with his whole army. He besieged it, and they built towers against it all around. The city continued in a state of siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah, the Jewish king of Judah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, which we know as Tisha B'Av, the famine had become acute in the city of Jerusalem. There was no food left for the common people. Then the wall of the city was breached. All the soldiers left the city by night through the gate between the double walls, which is near the king's garden. The Chaldeans, or Babylonians as we refer to them in this context, were all around the city, and the king set out for the Arava. So, opera lovers among us might be most familiar with Nebuchadnezzar because he is the title character of Verdi's opera Nabucco, which of course can be a wonderful evening's entertainment, even though at its heart, this opera, which some would say is the one that permanently established Verdi's reputation as a composer, the opera that he himself described as having been born under a lucky star. This opera, Nabucco, tells the story of the Jews being assaulted, conquered, and then exiled from Judah and Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar II. One of the highlights of the opera is the great, rousing chorus of the Hebrew slaves. According to tradition, this fast of the 10th of Tevet also commemorates other calamities that occurred throughout Jewish history on the 10th of Tevet, and the 2 days preceding it. On the 8th of Tevet in the 3rd century before the Common Era, Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, ordered the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, a work which later became known as the Septuagint. On the surface, this might not seem like such a terrible thing. At least foreign rulers were showing an interest in learning about the Torah. But in reality, 72 sages were placed in solitary confinement and ordered to translate the Torah into Greek. Judaism sees this event and its circumstances as a tragedy, and this event reflected a diminishment by an external force of the Torah and a readiness to submit Torah to human manipulation by changing the language. And one might argue that Jews have been translating the Torah into the other local languages, the vernacular that they speak, for a very long time. So if we ourselves seem to have come to terms with this practice, then why bother continuing to see this as a day of mourning? And it's an interesting point as we remind ourselves that from the verses that we've just read, which point to the fact that there was a time when all the world's Jews lived together in the same place and spoke a single language. So for a group of religious people to be forced to translate the Torah into another language, and in particular the language of one's conqueror, one's oppressor, for the first time in history, this was a tragedy, as it marked the dissolution of the Torah's intrinsic value and sanctity, which were and still are inextricably bound up with Torah's original language. Another event surrounding this date of the 10th of Tevet. On the 9th of Tevet, we are told that Ezra the scribe, the great leader who brought some Jews back to the Holy Land from Babylonian exile sometime later, and who ushered in the era of the Second Temple, we're told that he died on this day, on the 9th of Tevet. What I found particularly interesting, because it was new to me as I was researching the 10th of Tevet, was that it also has a much more modern element. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the chief rabbinate decided that because of this date's historical significance, the 10th of Tevet should also become known as a general Kaddish Day, Yom HaKaddish HaKlali, to allow the relatives of the victims of the Holocaust, whose actual Yortzeit dates were generally unknown, to observe the Yortzeit for them on this date, to decide that this is going to be the date in the entire year's calendar when we have Yortzeit for those who we do not know exactly when they died. Now, I have to admit that I never knew this before, and so I found it fascinating to learn about the thinking of Israel's chief rabbis pretty recently, to learn about their sensitivity to the fact that we will probably never ever know the actual Yortzeit dates for millions of our relatives who were murdered, and that despite this we have a need for closure and a need to remember. So there you have it. Not exactly a cheerful reflection, but I would hope that it is an opening, yet another window into the depth of Jewish tradition, both ancient and also a look at the timeless connections that contemporary Jewish life seeks to create for us, which to me is incredibly meaningful. As always, survival, or as so often, survival seems to be front and center. We celebrate it, although for me, The fact that we have overcome is not what we are all about. We do not strive to overcome and to survive for survival's sake. We strive to continue to move forward as Jews because we have a central mission of Torah that makes survival worthwhile, that makes the future worthwhile, and something that we feel we have to contribute to. And so, as always, as much as we look back, we continue to keep our eyes trained on the horizon. Shabbat Shalom.